Shalom, brothers and sisters. You can see Shadow right there, as comfortable as can be on his chair. I wanted to make a short video on the topic of Babylon. I have long been convinced that the United States is the Babylon of Revelations, and in fact, I set out to writing this book. This is the potential cover of the book. I'm 100 or so pages into the first draft of this, but I just dropped off this work because I had been feeling quite depressed for a while, and it occurred to me maybe it's because I'm not using my talents to share what I'm researching. For example, when I was writing the book that I wrote about Paul, I did it verse by verse by verse. And so I thought maybe the same people who I've been able to connect with for that reason may also be able to appreciate the same approach when applied to the prophecies about who Babylon is. And these prophecies can be found in Revelations, Isaiah, and Jeremiah principally. But there are also mentions of Babylon in Genesis and Psalms. So I wanted to start today with just one single verse and talk a little bit about what is good exegesis and bad exegesis. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the understanding has to be given with the Spirit. So I'm going to just get right into that with Revelations chapter 17, just looking at verse 1. I am only, I think, going to look at just this one verse. There's a lot of different tangents that I could go down with Revelations 17 verse 1, but let's read it first. And there came one of 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. This great whore would be Babylon. Now, I'm going to ignore and not attempt to do any exegesis on the 7s here, the 7 angels and 7 vials. I don't think that is as important as the discussion of who Babylon is. So I just want to show you a goofy example of bad exegesis and what I think a proper exegesis of this passage would be. And, with end times predictions of Revelations, it is important to keep in mind that anyone who's been predicting, when Jesus comes back in the end of time has been wrong pretty much ever up to this point in time. And so I'm not attempting to put a time on any of these things, but as I'm analyzing these verses, if we were just to look at planet Earth as it is today, who would fit the boots? Who would most accurately be described by this? So the great whore that sits upon many waters. So the upon many waters, let's break this down and understand what it is. Now, waters could be interpreted literally. I'm going to give you an example of bad exegesis on that right now. But also, I want to show you here in the Blue Letter Bible website, just so you can see here, you can take a look at the Greek here yourself. If you click on Tools next to the verse on blueletterbible.com, you can see for each and every one of the words listed the Greek, as well as a link to the lexicon. So the word waters here, hydor. Now this, yes, is defined primarily as water, but also notice here, figuratively used of many peoples. And so I think when it comes to doing exegesis on a passage like this, it's important to keep in mind that there can be double meanings. And so this may refer to literal water, or this may also refer to people. The seated, I refer to that as having power. or any type, power, political, economic, military, that extends beyond its own borders across oceans. And now I want to give an example of bad exegesis. This doesn't have anything to do with what percentage of water a country's geography has, because I did some research on that, and as far as the countries that have the most water within their borders, actually number one for fresh water on planet Earth is Brazil. I'm not sure many people know that. You know, the United States has lots of rivers, lots of clean drinking water, but it's still less than Canada, Russia, and of course number one, Brazil. So hey, Brazil's got the most water, the most drinkable water in its borders. So that means Brazil is Babylon. Done. We can stop reading the book of Revelation. Nothing further to interpret. We've got factual evidence in the form of a chart. See, Brazil's got the most water, therefore Brazil is Babylon. So of course I'm being facetious about that. Brazil is not Babylon. No one in the history of anything recorded that I can find in all the research I've done on Babylon, no one has ever suggested that, because part of the difficulty in doing a good exegesis on Revelations is, number one, people have been trying to figure out the prophecies of Revelation for pretty close to 2 millennia now, and have been either wrong or early in their analysis of who that might be. And it's very easy to cherry pick just one verse like this, and oh, the horse sits on many waters, so let's see what countries have waters. And now, I just wanted to point out here kind of an interesting little detail. So yeah, you see all these different countries here. Part of the reason why I like Colombia is there's just every little town, every little part of the country, even though it's relatively a small country compared to all these other countries on the list, just fresh water abounds absolutely everywhere. Every little town has its own river running through it. It's absolutely beautiful out here. But anyways, if you're taking a look at Revelation chapter 17, and you just say, oh, she sits upon many waters, so who's got waters? Maybe it's the Great Lakes, maybe it's something like that. Many waters could refer to oceans as well, not just something that is, within the border here. So I say sarcastically in my analysis that I've written, hey, that chart settles it, Brazil is Babylon. I spent half a year in Brazil and Amazon, and I really love the country and its people. I would have stayed there longer had I been able to do so. For all of Brazil's faults, I really do think it's a great country, and I'd like to go back one day. But they have a saying in Brazil that Brazil is the country of the future, and it always will be. Which is a sort of sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek way of saying that Brazil has so much potential and they're never going to live up to it. That's basically what the interpretation of that is by the people. It's more of a political cynicism, not that there's a spiritual meaning to that, but more of a political cynicism about their system. Okay, so of course, the analysis of who Babylon is must be extended far beyond just one verse and take into account all of its characteristics. Canada is the second largest country in the world, has more lakes than anyone else, yet they exert little control on the global stage. So sitting across many waters would more logically refer to bordering oceans. North America appears to be an island due to its distance from other continents. It is as if a moat of water protects the castle that is North America. And so I'm going to continue here in my analysis just of this one verse, but I want to go on a tangent because you can never cherry pick just one verse that describes who Babylon is in order to establish the definition of who is Babylon. For example, people have frequently pointed out that in the description of Babylon, Babylon sits upon 7 hills. And so people have interpreted that to mean the Vatican, because apparently the Vatican is upon 7 hills. And allegedly Washington, D.C. is on 7 hills. Israel, Jerusalem. Apparently there's some sort of Seven Hills connection there, but I haven't looked too much into it. So, people can cherry pick a single detail. And, one thing that has occurred to me in my exegesis of this is Seven Hills. There's how many continents? So we would be looking at Babylon being an end times global power that attempts to exert itself on every continent on Earth. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret these things, and when you look at one thing in isolation, Vatican, it's on Seven Hills, therefore it's Babylon. But going back to this verse in 17:1, the great whore that sits upon many waters, in what way would that describe the Vatican or Israel or these other alleged candidates for who Babylon is? So it is really important to take a look at a variety of potential interpretations to this, and never just one verse in isolation to define who Babylon is. So continuing here, I argue the strongest case lies in favor of one country virtually dominating oceans, whether that is de facto or de jure. The United States is estimated to have over 750 military bases in foreign countries. This is an impressive 70 to 80% of all extranational military bases on the planet. So what I'm arguing here is that the whore that sits on many waters is the whore that controls planet Earth, that controls the different continents, the different oceans, those being the waters. Or, again, going back to the Blue Letter Bible, which showed the lexicon for waters, and this word in the Greek can also figuratively be used to refer to a great multitude of people. So that is to say, all the military bases on foreign soil of all countries combined is less than a third of the number of military bases abroad of the United States. These bases host the world's largest air force. I go into some nerdy statistics there, but basically the United States is dominant in a lot of different ways in terms of its military power compared to the military of any other country on the planet. Not unilaterally, and that's not to say that there's no weaknesses. That's part of the reason for why Babylon falls. But to continue here without going down that tangent, in Jeremiah 50:23, it describes Babylon as the hammer of the whole earth. David Vine, author of the book Base Nation, claims that we have up to 2,000 military bases abroad at various times in our history. Okay, so, Babylon is also the hammer of the whole earth, sits on many waters, interpreted as controlling many oceans or continents. Consider also our military spending versus other countries. Institute for Policy Studies reports that the U.S. military 2021 spent more than the next 9 largest military spenders combined. More dramatically, the United States spent more than the entire rest of the world, not including those largest 9 countries. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. That's kind of a confusing factoid, and I'm not sure if it is more dramatically. I'm just going to take that line out and find a way to rephrase that later, because that really is the key detail there, that the United States military has spent more than the next 9 largest militaries in the world combined, including China. So according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the United States has the 3rd highest military spending per GDP in the world, behind Qatar and Israel. With the highest GDP in the world, the dominance in spending enables a global empire that nearly has the majority of the entire world's military spending. Militarily and politically, the seat of power is in Washington, D.C., at least in terms of money spent. That is not to say that Babylon has no weaknesses, and Babylon's weaknesses in later verses will be revealed, and the weaknesses are ultimately what leads to the downfall of Babylon. But nonetheless, we're taking into account 2 different verses here, the hammer of the whole earth and seated upon many waters. Okay, so furthermore, seated upon many waters becomes quite literal, as the United Nations is headquartered in New York City. This building is, and this is a key detail, not many miles away from the port city of Babylon, New York. Leaders of all nations congregate in New York City in the spirit of international cooperation, but even within a superficially representative system in which all nations have a seat at the table, there are certain animals more equal than other animals, a la Animal Farm. The UN's Security Council features 5 permanent members, including, of course, the United States. Some animals are more equal than others. The alternative interpretation of Revelation 17 verse 1 suggests that the waters refers to multitudes of individuals. Our nation has been a nation of immigrants since before it was independent, and virtually all countries have seen their citizens take advantages of opportunities to live and work in the United States. Now, historically, us being a nation of immigrants, we were primarily a nation of immigrants from European countries. But especially in the past half century or so, the immigration has come primarily from outside of Europe, from all countries in the world. And so it's really hard to find another country on the planet that would have the diversity of immigration and the intensity of immigration that the United States has. I understand that in recent years, yes, Europe has also faced that as well. So possibly Europe could be considered as part of Babylon or a candidate for Babylon as well. I have worked about a year now. Actually, oh goodness, when did I start writing this? I must have started writing this about 2 years ago. So about 3 years now, we help sponsor people for work visas and so forth. I'm going to skip ahead there. I may or may not be continuing with that. I have some statistics here on, immigration from south of the border. I'm sure, I don't need to explain anything that's going on there. There's both legal and illegal immigration going on in great detail. But moving on, I'm setting that aside as far as the whore Babylon in this verse, Revelation 17:1, is referring to someone who sits upon a multitude of waters. As we saw from the lexicon, this is a verse interpreted to mean also potential, or this word, the Greek word, is interpreted also to mean that this could refer to a multitude of people and not just literal waters. I think as a rule of thumb in exegesis, if you can get a double meaning from the interpretation of it, and the double meaning applies to the same subject as, for example, of Babylon here, if there's a way to get a literal and a figurative interpretation out of it, that's more likely to be true than any interpretation which would just have one or the other. Okay, so continuing in this verse, the great whore, Strong's 4204. This is more commonly translated into English as harlot in the King James, such as Rahab the harlot in Hebrews 11:31. More vulgar, this would imply a prostitute or a loose woman. So in what ways do the United States prostitute itself around the world? I am, of course, arguing that the United States is Babylon here. So militarily, in protecting sea lanes and certain favored allies, the great whore sitting upon many waters is that the United States does more to protect international commerce than does any other individual nation. China might protect international trade to some extent, but mostly within its own territorial waters. The United States has its navy and military all around the world, and basically the capitalist, money-based system that they have goes through the sea lanes and abides by their maritime law. and so forth. And so the United States is mostly dominating that compared to the fleets of other countries. The other countries are relatively insignificant. And, militarily protecting certain allies, Saudi Arabia, many years currently into a genocide of the Yemenis, still has a U.S. backing as part of our deal to protect the Saudis in exchange for them selling oil in U.S. dollars. Even though the Saudis are no longer exclusively selling oil in U.S. dollars, the U.S. is still happy to make arms deals with them, sell them plenty of stuff. Whether or not they're doing a genocide in Yemen seems certainly like they are. Anyways, other countries receive overt support packages such as Israel and Ukraine. I think when I started writing this, the United States had spent some $50 billion to Ukraine in 2022. I haven't even updated those statistics since then, so forget it. And so again, we're still on Revelation 17:1 here. This is the last paragraph in my interpretation just of this first verse. The economic prostitution of Babylon is no less shameful. A wife would be faithful to her husband, even as a better option might seemingly or actually be available, in honor of her vows, whilst a whore will certainly jump ship and seek the most opportunistic short-term outcome. And so this is important as a detail referring to the whore of Babylon, in that the whore of Babylon, the word is chosen prophetically because this is referring to this end times civilization, this end times empire that attempts to dominate the whole world, has this toxic feminine quality of being whorish rather than having this sort of Proverbs 31 ideal wife. Whatever the opposite of Proverbs 31 is, in terms of the moral aspects of that, would be a whore, the end times Babylon. So how much of our manufacturing, for example, has been offshored for the sake of short-term prosperity or the owners of private companies? While China and other nations have increased to an extent the economic freedoms of their citizens, the real economic growth of manufacturing economies cannot be but linked to their robust export trades to the United States, often doing the very production of these American corporations like Apple. There's been reports of, for example, factories for Apple products in China, and they have suicide nets outside the window so that the workers who are overworked and suicidal don't jump up out the window and get blood on the Apple factory. And so there's all sorts of abuses with, Nike and other companies operating sweatshops. And, you've got this concept of whorishness economically. And so this whorishness is that, rather than pursuing faithfulness, as a wife would be faithful, honoring her vows, best case scenario, right? Whereas a whore is going to be opportunistic and just enjoy whatever short-term opportunity were to arise. And this has happened with the manufacturing of the United States, as well as a lot of, other economic consequences, such as the national debt, so on and so forth. Okay, so this is more or less a concept that I'd like to continue presenting, but anytime I've talked about Babylon or attempted to do exegesis, no one seems particularly to care, so if you're still watching, if you managed to get through this, let me know if you'd like me to continue doing these videos. I've got, so far close to 100 or so pages written, analyzing all these different verses to do with Babylon. But, most of my viewers are from who I believe Babylon to be, United States, and no one wants to hear that. Babylon might be the United States if they live in the United States. So, brothers and sisters, shalom. Let me know what you think.